The wind screamed across the Montana plains with a rage that felt almost personal, as if the storm itself wanted to strip the world down to bone and silence. And for the Carter family, Emily, her 2 young sons Noah and Liam, and her teenage daughter Grace, the blizzard was more than just weather. It was a white wall of death creeping, steadily closer as their old minivan groaned. Along the deserted highway, snow piling against the doors, the engine coughing like an old man taking his final breaths, and Emily gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles ached, whispering prayers under her breath because she knew they should have never been out there. Not with a storm like this, not with the temperature plunging. So fast it felt like the air itself was turning to ice. But when your family is starving, when the pantry is down to crumbs, when the last can of soup has already been split 4 ways, and when you're driving toward the only job offering within 100 miles, sometimes hope makes you take risks that fear can't argue with. The wipers smeared more than they cleared. The headlights could barely reach 5 feet ahead. And inside the van, the children huddled under thin blankets that did nothing against the cold biting through the metal frame, their breaths turning to mist as Grace tried to reassure her brothers that everything would be all right, even though her eyes kept darting to the dashboard, where the fuel gauge hovered, so low it might as well have been a flat line. And Emily kept telling herself she had done harder things in life, that she had survived heartbreak and illness and years of poverty, but none of that mattered when the car lurched once, twice, and then the engine died with a pitiful shudder that told her there would be no miracle this time. The silence after the engine stopped was worse than the wind. It was a silence that felt final, a silence that carried the shape of fear in it, because Emily knew that without heat the cold would seep into their bones, slow their hearts, and steal their lives quietly, the way winter had done to so many unprepared travelers before them. She tried the ignition again and again, but the engine refused to answer, its cold metal heart frozen stiff, and as panic tightened its grip on her chest, she forced herself to breathe, forced herself to think clearly, because the children were watching her with wide, frightened eyes, and she couldn't let them see her break, not when they needed her to be the anchor holding back the rising tide of terror. The storm pounded against the windows, rocking the van gently as if testing its strength, and Noah began to whimper, softly at first, then louder as he wrapped his arms around Liam, the 2 boys shaking with cold while Grace tried to comfort them, even though her own lips were turning blue, and Emily knew they had maybe an hour, maybe less, before the cold began stealing their consciousness, so she opened the glove compartment where she kept an old emergency flare, praying it still worked. But when she stepped out of the van, the blizzard slammed into her with a force that stole the breath from her lungs, snow driving sideways like needles as she shielded her face, and raised the flare with shaking hands, striking it once, nothing, twice, nothing. And just as her hope began to crack, the 3rd strike ignited, the flare in a sudden burst of orange-red fire that looked absurdly small against the towering, white chaos surrounding her. She held it high, waving it wildly, screaming into the wind, though her voice was swallowed instantly, her eyes burning with tears, not from fear but from the brutal cold that felt like it was flaying her skin. And as the flare hissed and sparked in her hand, she begged whatever force governed the world to let someone, anyone, see them, because she had fought too hard and too long to lose her children to a storm. The minutes dragged by until the flare burned down to a flickering stub, and just when despair started coiling around her ribs like a tightening rope, she heard something, distant, muffled but unmistakable, the low, rumbling growl of an engine cutting through. The storm like a lifeline thrown across a chasm. She spun toward the sound, eyes squinting through the swirling snow, and then she saw it. A beam of yellow light piercing the blizzard, growing brighter, closer, stronger, until a large, mud-streaked pickup truck emerged like a ghost from the white void, its tires carving deep lines in the snow as it slowed beside her van, and the driver door slammed open as a towering figure stepped out, a cowboy in a heavy duster coat, hat pulled low, scarf wrapped around his face, snow clinging to him like armor. His presence cutting through the storm with a quiet authority that made Emily's knees tremble with something like relief. He approached her with steady, unhurried steps, as if the storm wasn't threatening to swallow them whole. And when she tried to speak, her voice broke into a ragged whisper. "My kids, they're freezing. The car's dead. We need, please." But before she could finish, the cowboy reached out, gently but firmly steadying her shoulder, his voice deep and calm as he said, "Ma'am, you've done all you can. Let's get you out of this." And then he saw the children inside the van, 3 terrified faces peering through the frosted window, and without hesitation, he strode to the back of his truck, pulling out thick blankets and a thermos of hot broth, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rescued others before, someone who knew exactly how fast cold could kill. He bundled each child, gave them sips of warmth, checked their hands and cheeks for frostbite. And when Emily's legs nearly buckled from cold and fear leaving her all at once, he caught her arm before she fell, guiding her toward the open passenger door of his truck where warm air spilled out like a blessing. And then, with a voice that cut through the storm like a promise carved in stone, he said the words that Emily would remember for the rest of her life, words that hit her with more power than the blizzard itself. "All 4 of you, get in." It wasn't just an instruction. It was a lifeline, a vow, a shield between her family and the storm that wanted to claim them. And as she ushered her children into the safety of the truck's cab, feeling the heat wrap around them like a miracle, she looked up at the cowboy, this stranger, this unexpected savior, and felt a surge of gratitude, so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. The storm howled outside, furious at losing its prey. But inside the truck there was warmth, hope, and for the first time in a long time, the fragile beginning of a belief that maybe, just maybe, life was about to turn in their favor. And as the cowboy shifted the truck into gear and drove them back toward safety, toward a ranch tucked somewhere in the vast winter wilderness, Emily felt something stir inside her chest, a small, trembling flame of faith that the world wasn't done offering mercy yet. And if you want to know how this rescue changes everything for the Carter family, make sure you subscribe, because Chapter 2 is where the real miracle begins.